Retiring at age 54 with only $3 million saved might seem like pure madness to some, but not for Ryan and Hope LaPlaine. Perhaps aptly named, they had hope that this plan could work, but the question was how? With only $3 million, they were clearly well above that traditional 4% spending rule, with hopes of spending $150K per year. How could they make that work when they couldn't even take from their retirement accounts without incurring significant tax and penalties? Well, in today's Financial Prof video, we're going to walk you through step by step the plan that we set down and helped them create using the Quill Ledger process to make those dreams a reality. As Socrates once said, the unexamined life is not worth living. So let's examine exactly what we did for Hope and Ryan to make their dreams come true. Alright, so here we are again inside Wealth Vision. It's the financial planning software that we use for our planning engagements, powered by eMoney. Very comprehensive, and it's going to be how we illustrate how, for Hope and Ryan, we made their goals much more realistic than they were when they came in. You see, when they came in, they were looking at a $3.7 million net worth, right? Now, of that, a good chunk was in the house, $600,000 or so. Now, that was paid off thanks to some diligent saving over the years. And really, when it comes down to their investments, they were looking at a total of about $3 million, right? And that was split up across a few different pieces of the portfolio. They had a nice sized joint account, which was worth about $950K. There was a smallish whole life policy that had built up some cash value over the years. Ryan had gotten it when he was younger, and that had about $35K in it. Right? Now, they also had an emergency fund, cash on hand, if you will, of $30,000, earning a little bit of interest. Hope also had a 401k that had been converted to Roth a few years ago in preparation for making this eventual transition into retirement. And Ryan had his own 401k at work, which makes up the lion's share of our investments here at $1.928 million. So almost $2 million in that 401k. Now, their investments are broken down as follows. About 71% in equities, right? Mostly large cap US, a little bit of mid and small in there too. Now, bonds make up another 25% or so of the portfolio, their war chest, if you will. This was the section that they were wondering about, should we leave this much in bonds, or should we put a little bit more to work, or should we be more conservative, given that we're thinking about retiring this year as we are going to be using this money, right? They did also have some cash on hand inside the portfolio, inside a money market fund, 2.24% of the portfolio total, and that was giving them about a 3.5%-ish yield per year on average. And there was also again, as mentioned earlier, that whole life policy. Now, one thing we won't go into in this video, but I'll just mention briefly, is that in addition to being able to take tax-free loans off of this cash value if they wanted to, there's the possibility that they could decide to convert this into long-term care coverage using that cash value. But again, that's something for another video. So the challenge that we're looking at is essentially that when we come to a portfolio like this, the lion's share is in a pre-tax account. And if we touch any of that before we reach 59.5, we're going to have to pay taxes and penalties on this. The other big question mark overarching everything is, hey, is $3 million enough? Do we need to work longer? Ryan was getting sick of his job at the engineering firm. He liked it well enough, but he felt that the time had come, or is very soon to come, where he was going to hang up his hat for good. That was one of the questions we explored as well, is what that might look like to work a little bit longer, or perhaps decide 54 is it. And really, they wanted to see if 54 was doable. What was necessary to make that happen? So let's take a look at the plan that we put together for them. So we're going to come over here into the goal planner, which really helps us see on a Monte Carlo basis what the full likelihood of them being able to retire is. Now, obviously, in any future-based projection, you have to take it with a half a grain of salt, right? Because in some degree, we're predicting things that have not yet come to be. But this is a pretty reliable method of doing so. In fact, it's one of the most respected and reliable methods in the industry. So what it does, of course, a Monte Carlo simulation takes all of the numbers we've plugged in and runs it through 1,000 different permutations that the markets could take over the coming years, right? And for Hope and Ryan, we projected them out to age 90. And again, with them at age 54, we're talking about a retirement that lasted, over 35 years. That's not nothing, especially when you only have $3 million to do it with, and you want to spend $150,000 in total. So when they came to us and we plugged their base numbers in, their plan came back with a 52% probability of success. To put that into perspective, it's like saying, my retirement is going to be successful based on this coin flip. I'm hoping for tails. Maybe you get it, maybe you don't. Clearly, if you only retire once, you really want to make sure you get it right. So having odds better than the average coin flip is something that is probably a good thing. And that's what we were able to look at here. Once we took them through the Quill and Ledger process, and we had some honest conversations about what they wanted to spend on, what retirement actually looked like, we were able to bring their probability of success up to 75%. And we're going to see in a second here exactly how we did that. But let me just speak for a moment as to why 75%. When we're looking at a Monte Carlo simulation here, what we're really shooting for isn't necessarily 100%. As we've spoken about before, if you have 100% probability of success, that means you have a near statistical guarantee that you're going to not run out of money, and not just not run out of money, but actually die with money, probably a lot of money, which if that's your goal, as it is for some people here at Norberg Wealth Management who we've worked with, then great. The conversation shifts from do I have enough to what legacy do I want to leave for those who come after me? It becomes an entirely different conversation at that point. But for Ryan and Hope, it was less about, leaving a huge legacy and more about being able to spend those years while they were still young and healthy doing the things they loved. They had 3 children. They wanted to be able to spend more time, especially as grandchildren started entering into the scene, to be able to travel while they were young and fit and able to climb those stairs. This is one of the reasons that they're looking at age 54 versus, say, age 62 or 65, as many people coming to us do. So, how did we make this work? Well, in order to explain exactly what happened and the things that we discussed, we're going to dive into the Decision Center. Now, the Decision Center is one of my favorite pieces of this entire software suite because what we can do is start adding in individual strategies, as you'll see here, and figure out how exactly do they affect the portfolio, not just in 1 year or 5 years, but over the course of the whole portfolio lifetime to see what each individual strategy can add. So, we looked at a number of different strategies with the overall goal of seeing as far as possible how it might be able to retire at 54. Again, Ryan, he was feeling like he was done. He'd spent years upon years upon years in the engineering world, and he was ready to spend his time doing something else. Hope had done some teaching in her earlier years, taken a break to raise the kids, but at the same time still maintained some sort of part-time income thanks to a small hobby farm that they had. And as a result, she had her own Social Security benefit as well. Certainly nowhere near Ryan's, but something that they could rely upon if they chose to claim early. And in fact, if you look down here, that is one of the strategies that we looked at, but we decided not to use. We thought about, okay, what if Hope claims on her own basis as early as possible at 62, and then we have Ryan delay until 70. Well, when we ran the numbers, it actually didn't look quite as good as it could have otherwise. So we decided, you know what, we're just going to do a retirement age claiming strategy, age 67, with the understanding that if we choose to, we can actually pull that Social Security lever earlier for both of them if the markets, let's just say, look particularly bad during the early 60s, and we want to have some sort of pressure relief valve on the income streams so we can allow the portfolio to recover. And really at Norberg Wealth Management, that's one of the main philosophies we have around Social Security, is to use it as a safety valve, if you will, to allow the portfolio recovery time if we experience unexpected turbulence during those early years of retirement when the sequence of returns risk is so high and things are so vital to get right. But not to bury the lead, what did we do to make sure that Hope and Ryan were in fact able to retire at the age of 54 and spend what they wanted to? Well, after determining that $150,000 was their base level of spending, we actually started diving into each individual nut and bolt of that spending detail. And one of the things that we saw on Ryan's spreadsheet when they came in and showed it to us was there was a huge line item for $25,000 a year, all the way through retirement. And we asked about it, and it was healthcare. Healthcare is one of the big mysteries for folks who are deciding, maybe I want to retire before I get to my, age 65 Medicare age, right? Because at 65, we can go on the Medicare program and all of a sudden healthcare is more or less taken care of for us until kingdom come. But before then, you're on your own. and you have to figure out if you're stepping away from an insurance plan at work, what does healthcare actually look like? So that's where Ryan and Hope and I had a really strong conversation around different options for healthcare to try to see what were ways that we could bring that line item, one of the largest on the entire spreadsheet, down from 25,000 per year. Was that even realistic? Well, we looked at a number of different options, including the Minsure health insurance marketplace. They were Minnesota residents, of course, so that was their marketplace, and looked at the subsidy options for bringing those costs down. And the good news is, with their income in retirement likely coming almost entirely from that taxable joint account, brokerage account that they had, that they would likely qualify for at least some kind of subsidies. However, we also had a conversation around health shares. Now, I am not advocating for health shares. I'm also not advocating against them, but they are a very valid option to consider when you're thinking about pre-Medicare healthcare. And they had done some looking around. They had a few relatives who had actually used health shares and had good experiences. So they were able, being relatively healthy themselves, to identify a health share program which not only shared their values, but was able to save them money at the same time. So we were able to identify that 12K per year from age 54 until 65, as you'll see right here, was the cost that they were going to spend on that health share. Now, they do have an emergency fund in case things do unexpectedly change from a health perspective, right? And that might be something that they have to worry about if, say, one of them gets a terminal cancer diagnosis or something like that. But all things equal, what they were looking at was a 12K per year spend using that pre-Medicare health share. Now, the other thing we were able to do as a result of that is bring their living expenses down from 150K to 135K after 65, accounting for the Medicare costs, which is about $200 per person per month. Now, obviously, we're also indexing this for inflation. So really, these two pieces alone were one of the biggest cruces upon which this entire retirement plan hung. Because if you look at this, all of a sudden, when I turn off these two adjustments, we barely squeak in at the end. And statistically speaking, we're looking pretty slim here by the end of life projections. So really identifying what your spending goals are and then examining what you're spending that money on and making sure you have accurate numbers and that you're going to understand what those numbers look like throughout retirement, including in the case of the unexpected, is crucial. One of the other things we did to help the overall spending picture was adjusting the ratio of qualified money that they withdrew annually to only 10%, right? Really trying to squeeze out the best that we can from the taxable brokerage account, as well as that Roth that Hope had, to make that tax picture as favorable as possible. Now, with RMDs kicking in at age 75 and a good big $2 million chunk of money that's in a pre-tax account, we also decided to start a Roth conversion program. Now, Ryan wasn't as concerned about the RMDs later in retirement, so we didn't do an aggressive plan here. And if we decided to change that in the future, we certainly could. But we are at least going to fill up that 10% bracket in conjunction with making sure that we're using our 0% capital gains bracket effectively, which goes up to about 98.9K this year, that a married couple can earn and spend off of a taxable brokerage account before incurring 15% capital gains above that level. A couple of other things that we also looked at here that I do want to mention. I already mentioned the Social Security piece. We decided against that because it didn't meaningfully improve the plan. But again, if we decide to change this because of unexpected market or life events in the future, we can certainly come back to this. And this is where, again, knowing that life happens outside the four walls of a financial office, it can be really important to have an ongoing relationship with a financial planner so that as life changes and as circumstances change, you don't have to rely on one piece of paper or one plan that was written for you years ago and might or might not reflect the reality in which you live. And by the way, if this is you or if you're seeing yourself in any of these numbers in any of this story, I would encourage you to click the link in the description and book a call with us. We'd love to hear what your goals are and see if we can get you to your retirement on time, if not early, like Ryan and Hope, right? One of the things that we did look at, though, for Ryan was maybe having him do some part-time consulting for 2 years. Now, if I flip this on And Ryan earns, just on our basis of assumption, 100K per year in doing some part-time engineering consulting for 2 years after he retires. That changes the picture pretty dramatically. But we said we don't want to do that if we don't have to, because again, engineering was starting to get old for Ryan. So what does it look like if we turn that off? And the good news is we were still able to make it. Again, it's that 75% likelihood that we saw earlier. Ryan wanted to be able to do some volunteering, both around his parish and his community, and having part-time demands on his schedule of any kind would probably get in the way of that, especially if, as Ryan and Hope did want to, they were going to be doing some traveling as well, not only to see grandkids, but also to places that they'd read about and never really had the chance to visit. So that's where we said, you know what, this could be a lever that we pull. Again, if things are looking dicey out there, Ryan has a good network. He could probably do some consulting to bring in a little extra cash. One of the things that we also talked about, just briefly, and I say it because it hits close to home, was that Hope had a small agribusiness that she ran for a number of years when she was younger and had also maintained, selling eggs, milk, right? They lived on a small hobby farm. We didn't include that income in this picture, but it was a way that they knew they would be able to pad the results a little bit if necessary by really focusing in on that as well. But it was really more of a hobby than a true income generator, which is why we didn't include it here. But the whole point of that discussion is to say some sort of part-time income or part-time work in the first few years of retirement can also dramatically change the picture, especially if you're looking at retiring from your main gig a little earlier than most, which for 54 definitely is on the aggressive side, but doable as we're seeing here. Now, just a couple of other things. Assuming that they did pass away at age 90, we also did say, working with a good estate attorney partner of ours, that revocable trusts would be an advisable part of their strategy, not only to avoid probate, but also to start structuring some of what that money would do if indeed they were left with some when they did pass. And according to our projections here, it looked quite possible that they would still end up with $1 million or $2 million left over if markets behaved the way that we have seen them do so in recent history. But with the unexpected, we still wanted to know what would happen if they did experience a dramatic drop. And so that's where we said having at least 1 year of cash on hand in the portfolio as you head into this retirement is probably not a bad idea. So adjusting the portfolio allocations towards that so that they had $150,000 was not a bad idea. But also the element that we discussed as part of this entire plan was, look, that Roth that you converted a couple of years ago for Hope could act as a lever as well. Because one thing that few people actually know is that once you convert a Roth and you wait that 5-year window, whether or not you're age 59 and a half, you can actually pull that money out, the contribution or conversion amount, so in this case $100,000, rather than the growth, without incurring taxes, no matter how old you are. So to phrase that again, if you have a Roth IRA or 401k that has been in existence for 5 years or more, you can withdraw up to the amount that you've converted or contributed as long as that 5-year window has been met without incurring that taxation that would otherwise kick into play if you're under the age of 59 and a half. So that was another lever that they could pull if they really needed to. All in all, the entire crux of this turns on the examined life. Again, I mentioned Socrates earlier in the video. Examining what they were spending money on and being able to know that that's what we're actually going to do when we step into retirement was key to this whole plan. So when Ryan and Hope came back in after we had had our initial meeting, we presented this plan that I just showed you. You could practically see the relief dripping off of them. They were amazed and delighted to see that their plan to retire at age 54 and still spend what they wanted to maintain their lifestyle was not only doable, but within reach. And this is the piece that they didn't expect, that healthcare, when actually examined carefully, wasn't going to necessarily cost them $25,000 per year. It was that piece alone that was able to bring the plan from probably foolhardy into the realm of actually possible. So if you combine that with a few of the other pieces that we looked at, withdrawing from the right buckets first, again, that pre-tax money, being able to use that strategically through aggressive Roth conversions in the right years, opportunistically using some of those lower tax bracket years to shift some of that money so that the RMD tax time bomb didn't explode in their faces completely, while also understanding that by choosing not to do the Roth conversions to the 22-24% bracket would mean that RMDs were higher later in their retirement, did mean that they were able to retire successfully without a pension, without having to worry that they're going to run out of money at age 68, and it meant that they were able to spend more time with their children, with their grandchildren, traveling the world like they had dreamt about, and that Ryan wouldn't be chained to his desk for another 5 years. So again, I would encourage you, if you see yourself in any of this case study, if you're somebody who's in your mid-50s and thinking, could I actually do it with just a few $1,000,000 set aside, even if the majority of it is in pre-tax, I would encourage you to click the link below, book a call with us. The worst you're out is a little bit of your time, but hey, maybe, like we did for Ryan and Hope, who, by the way, are based on real people even though the names have been changed to protect the innocent, as we did for Ryan and Hope, to make the impossible possible, so to speak. I'm John Norberg, and again, I'd like to thank you for watching this latest edition of the Financial Prof series, and in the meantime, I'll see you out there.